We're going to talk about your new book, Tarrare.
Right.
From New Generation Beat Publications. And I'm really curious about your writing process. I picture you, probably falsely, but you're again sort of a hypnotic state or a dream state when you write. Is that totally ridiculous?
No, I think there's some validity to it. That's a great question, because with these monologues, these dramatic monologues, which I was very anxious to get out, there's 23 of them, and it's and the speakers are very diverse, and the methodology I use is, first of all, I'll immerse myself in the character that I'm going to express, whether it be Tarrare or Peter Doyle, Walt Whitman's lover, or Shakespeare himself, and so I'll read a whole lot. I'll read very, very intently in that person's oeuvre, biographical material. I have to say, I regret early on in my existence, I was schooled by the people who didn't believe in biographical data being relevant to poetic interpretation. I.A. Richards and those people. What was that called? What was the movement called? New criticism. Thank you, Rosalie. But now I've kind of flipped, and so I'll immerse myself in the material until I'm just basically walking around in the head of the character, a lot like an actor would do, and then the lines begin to come. And so I'll write a draft, and then I'll look at the draft, and I'll look for what Ezra Pound called a luminous detail in the draft. Say, with Shakespeare, where was Shakespeare living at the time in London, and what was the route he took to the palace to rehearse, for example. And then you discover in that process, in the geographical process, that he had to go over London Bridge. That's why I call the poem London Bridge. And on London Bridge, when he went through it, he would see on pikes the heads of all of his supporters, Danvers and Bowers and the whole crew, because they were involved in a plot to assassinate Elizabeth. So of course, that kind of ups the emotional charge in the poem, and you begin to work into that, and you realize that at that time, Shakespeare had just performed Richard II, where Elizabeth calls him out on it. Says, she says to Walsingham, that turkey, that Shakespeare prat, he meant me. I was supposed to be Richard II in that play. So he's like in danger. And so you want to communicate that terror that he's experiencing, and the notion that his life is in jeopardy, and then you flesh it out, and I specifically mentioned the Shakespeare monologue because the dialect I use in virtually all the monologues is what I feel, to my ear, is drawn from Elizabethan prosody. And the reason I did that was, over the years, we're all familiar to one degree or another with Shakespeare. That seems to be a way of language structure that is most conducive to not only a poetic language, but into a highly ideological expressiveness, a way of getting ideas across that is very profound and has the kind of automatic ring of truth to it. And I've been working in that. I know it confuses some audiences, but most people are open enough to be entertained by it. So That's a long answer to the question.
That's fine. So, it's not a popular way to write, but you are really drawn to it. And you even say in the back of your book, if you ever wondered what a great unnecessary work looks like, here it is in this collection. But yet you will still write like this because it really speaks to you, and you hope it speaks to other people, I guess.
Well, and that statement has to do with relevance. One thing I discovered when I came out with the Canaanite Gospel about 10 or 12 years ago was that those monologues, it's 88 monologues, and they're patterning them also after the monologues of the monologue poems of David Jones, the brilliant World War I Welsh British poet, who inspired me with his monologues in the voice of a Roman principalis who was living in 33 AD at the time that Jesus was wandering around. Just a fantastic poems. I can't say enough about them. The Fatigue and the Wall are just brilliant. So what I'm saying there is people don't seem to understand that even with the Canaanite Gospel, I was talking about the United States. I was, and through that old saw of the fall of the Roman Empire. So throughout the entire 88 monologues that comprise that book, the 188 pages or so, it's a constant repetitive theme. It's like why empires fall and relating it to the United States. And I can't think of anything more relevant than that, but my critics are always saying, you don't write anything relevant, because their notion of writing something critical of the United States is to go in and directly criticize some aspect of the United States, which ends up being a kind of, more often than not, just a kind of temporary rhetorical jibe at some aspect of the fall or of it, or some overweening view of what's wrong with it, or a litany of, but not very poetic to my mind. So it's the same with these monologues. They all have a relevance to now, and the relevance is enhanced by the Elizabethan, or what I hear as the Elizabethan prosody, because it's a much more profound way of thinking they had at that time than we have now. I mean, we're just wallowing in the banality of mass media, and it affects all of us. So a lot of the way things are expressed don't have that enduring quality that you find in Shakespeare. I mean, the quotable 500 years later, and it's not there now. Even the kind of clever use of adjectives, which I can't do personally, so I kind of admire it. That is in there in a lot of poetry now. It never gets to that level where the entire statement is a kind of explosion of insight into what it is to be human and what it is to be in these human predicaments. So in that sense, I'm distant from my audiences, but it is not my fault. It's more the fault of the world we live in, the commercial world, the mass media world, and that sort of thing. But I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but that's the other kind of relevance I'm talking about there, that people don't think that if I write something about this fictional meeting between Viol and Rabelais, where couldn't really take place, where I have Viol when Viol disappeared, when he vanished, I had him go to England to become the consigliere of a fictional bandit who was operating along the English coast near Dover, which is the shortest distance between France and England. And so I made up these three characters who accompany who accompany Rabelais, who's only 32 at the time, to meet with this 86-year-old Villon because he's so curious to hear what he's like and what he's been through and where he's been. So I never get to the meeting part because these are dialogues, 3 dialogues by lower echelon people who are just relating what it's like to be waiting, and but it has a tremendous relevance for the way statecraft works now. I mean, you have to read into them, but it's there, and people just and it's just too much for the present day audience because they're basically, and it includes poets too. They've just been lifted out of that, and for them it doesn't have any connection, or it doesn't connect for them, and it's a shame, but I can't work in any less profound way. I just won't do it, even if it means I go down with the ship of anonymity, or whatever you want to call it.
What briefly about your background? Something about translating and working with some famous poets from a long time ago?
Not me. I did translate Rilke for a number of years, but my mentor was Rudd Fleming at the University of Maryland, and to avoid the draft, I went to the University of Maryland because I hadn't taken the SATs and my grades were terrible, all of that. But I was a resident of Maryland at the time, though even though I lived like a half mile from the DC line, the Washington DC line. But anyway, he was a professor there, and when Ezra Pound was incarcerated at St. Elizabeth's, he had translated Greek drama with Ezra Pound for 9 years. So he knew the Pounds, Ezra and Dorothy, intimately. He and his wife Polly, and so I became a student, and eventually we became friends. And for over 30 years, we saw each other. I visited him probably once every month or 6 weeks for 30 years, and we would discuss. In my earlier incarnation, he suggested I write in the Cantos style, which attracted me. So I wrote in the Cantos style for the first 30 or 35 years of my writing career. And then the David Jones, to make a long story short, or a short story long, me and one of the people on the staff of this magazine I published, this online magazine, Brad Haas, we always loved David Jones. We loved his World War I poem, in parenthesis, and his great epic Anathemata. We just loved the guy. But we always wanted to do an issue of the magazine based on David Jones. Well, Georgetown University here in Washington, D.C. got a huge bequeathment of materials of David Jones. So Brad, who was a member of the David Jones Society, and who traveled to England every year, once a year, the entire David Jones Society. There's a David Jones Society here in the U.S. and in England, but the one in England, they all came over for this Georgetown bequeath to view all of this material. It was excellent, and we had a 3-day kind of symposium, and there was a biographical film. So after that, we decided to publish the papers that were delivered at the conference. And as we were doing that, and as we were editing them for our magazine, I found myself rereading Jones, and when I reread, and I have a rare recording of him reading it, his poem "The Fatigue," which is in the voice of one of these sergeants of principalis, I said, I have to write in that voice. I've got to try that voice. So I did it, and that ended up being the Canine Gospel in 88. It's 88 monologues in 67 different voices. So, and it helps to be naturally schizophrenic to do this. That's my association with Jones and Pound. They're not direct associations, but knowing Fleming, who was technically a James Joyce scholar, I did have a really firm grasp of the canto style. We discussed how you do it for 30 years, and ironically, when I sent Debbie this year for the anthology, I sent her a chunk of the what I consider the culminating work that's never been published in print. It's online of of my years doing that. It's called Tale of the Tribe: Deconstructing the Demiurge Tale of the Tribe, and it's I think it's 4,000 lines long, but I said didn't send out all of Debbie. I sent her maybe 120 lines. So anyway,
Who is Tarrare?
Tarrare. Well, Tarrare, he was a medical anomaly from France, and you can look him up. I mean, he was a character. He was a person with a terrible deformity. I don't really know what to call it, but his body was deformed and conditioned to be. He was conditioned to have an insatiable hunger. He could not stop eating. It's so much so that his family, at the age of 12, abandoned him because they couldn't support his voracious appetite. He would eat dead animals out of the gutters of Lyon. He would eat hay. He was reported to have eaten an infant in Lyon. And as a consequence of this trait, he became, at least for part of his life, a carnival sideshow. And the voice of the voice of the monologue is the carnival barker. But of course, it's not really. It's like, but he barks on for 1,200 lines or 800 lines. So it's obviously, I used the anomaly of Tarrare, who was just led a hideous life and died at 26, as a kind of counter to the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment, more closely the French Enlightenment. There's just a tremendous amount of references to the French Enlightenment, because we usually think of the Enlightenment as this progressive era, whereas this person's deformity so overwhelmed and it comes out of nature. It's like nature so overwhelms any concept of the progress of the Enlightenment. And so I'm constantly comparing his bodily functions to industrialization, like the pit mines at Crusoe, or the cannons of Subraman. So because there's kind of a metaphorical similarity between bodily functions and the industrial structure. But that I don't want to dwell too much on that. But that's who Tarrare is, a terribly deformed individual.
Since we're talking about it, would you like to read some from it?
From the Tarrare?
Yeah, and then there might be another one.
Yeah, okay. The Tarrare's kind of like become my signature piece for reading, so I should do a pretty fair job of it. Let's see. And I can't read the whole thing. Because it's like, I know it's at least 800 lines. So what I'll do is I'll just read the first section. And this is in the voice of a carny barker. Bien, viens-tu, come forfeit a sou, for tomorrow we flee the grand gutter of Paris. Over here, my friends, here, witness but for inscrutable happenstance, bereft of craft or demon intelligence of, say, the Saracen doodles of Laplace, or impieties of Descartes, or Louis Dudon, much less Bonaparte, and the devouring cannons of Subraman. Put the palsy, I shouldn't stop this, but the devouring cannons of Subraman. It's kind of both Tarrare and the cannons are devouring. Okay, that's like that's what I'm looking for. Part of just a small part of what I'm looking for. I shouldn't interrupt. Put the palsy to your first glance. What testify ought to rare bon chance, be the pride of France. A singular volley of nature's callous folly, whose self-wrought by famine shunned the ambitions of a Napoleon, for his gross appetite confound any passion for war. His taste for blood be no armchair metaphor of some general's nutted and clouded amour. Oh, yes, emperors may yearn, but tarry, as he gazed upon your pelt, yearn far more for none but the brush past immortality to feast upon your mortal gore. Ask Laplace, ask the good count to calculate the probability when such a creature, so grotesque in manner and feature, will again pass your way. Not since Ericson ran foul of Demeter has such a curse confound a man. This freak, this Tarrare, the issue of God's inchoate fury, whose hunger be an impregnable Bastille, liberty sanctioned by defect, what combat any knacker for a scrap. Hot to the touch, foul to the nose. An engine of consumption and waste, like the great maw of the puddling kilns at Crusoe or the Jacobin crematoriums of Lyon. You want immortality? Here be its underbelly. You want the Almighty? Here be his scat. You want myth? Here be its mortal stench. For the Sioux, follow your nose to its splendid core. In his dictionary philosophique, Voltaire's Japon have their gaki, and we so enlightened possess our Tarrare. You want capricious nature? Behold, gentlemen, this gullet, the open sewer of this blighted creature. What savage the morgue at Lyon, as if to be confiserated a petite chaise or an Apician banquet in Ictus or Rabelais. Come marvel at this sink, whose corroded studded snag is vast maw. Stare into this distended croft, you dare, into the abyss, the rank well of his bowel, lined with lesions and ulcers as wide as the Champs-Élysées. Clutch a rag against his sulphurous depths, and witness the ferment of rendered hooves, a rotting dog or petit enfant. Mind him disgorging a cat's fur, or shining shot what prior be lodged in a dragoon's shredded anatomy. Dauphine, old beggar, like God's judgment or Voltaire's, to our dear Tarrare, it's all equal down there. What the Guineas and Greeks levy in a mortal soul, but a Sioux grant you the titillation of this engine of hell. Mademoiselle, your mouchoir, mine is smell.
Wow, I think you're a pretty good actor. Have you done some formal acting?
No. I learned how to act when I did the monologues. I hired a Shakespearean actor to help me for a couple of weeks.
Oh,
so
okay.
But
we've got a pretty long interview here, and so people can find this book, I'm sure, at Amazon, and there's probably other places, or
well, you can find it on Abe.
On Abe?
Yeah, the online book selling site.
The favorite online outlet will probably have it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for visiting with us.
All right. Thanks for having. Thank you very much.